Listen, we're really happy to be here, and I want to start by thanking CGI for putting this conversation on the table. The Southern Education Foundation has been lifting up this issue forever. And we have consistently thought about it, talked about it, behaved about this as an entirely soluble problem. And I think that's going to be the emphasis that we take throughout the morning discussion. Let me just jump right in. I want to pull Patrick into the discussion first. Casey, it seems to me, has been among the organizations in the country that's done a consistent job of kind of tracking the data about children in poverty and families. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Casey's work and what the data tell us.
So I think I should start by acknowledging that whatever the Anna E. Casey Foundation ever learned about using data to tell the story about children and people in poverty, we learned from Marian Wright Edelman and all the work of the Children's Defense Fund. We have been tracking poverty in America among children for more than 25 years, and the distressing news is that the numbers of children in poverty has barely budged. We're still at almost 22% of children are in poverty. These numbers kind of roll off the tongue, but if you think about the experience of a family that has kids and the pressure on the parent who's probably holding down 2 and sometimes 3 jobs and feeling day after day the stress of trying to make the tough choices that come with being in poverty, and how that sense of stress gets passed on to children and how that affects them over the period of their lives, it's really critical. One of the categories of poverty that we haven't talked much about over recent years are the children in deep poverty. And by some estimates, it's anywhere from 3 to 5 million children, 1.5 to 2 million households that are living on $2, $3, $4 a day, literally selling plasma in order to make ends meet. So poverty is a complicated issue when you talk about children. There are children in deep poverty. There are children in chronic poverty that leads to all sorts of toxic stress that carries throughout their lives. And then there are the many families who are on either side of the perhaps artificial poverty line and yet experience day in, day out the kinds of pressures and stresses that don't bode well. Essentially, if we think about kids as the leading indicator of where this country is going to be in 25 years, we should be deeply troubled by those statistics.
Thanks. So Patrick's right. All of us have been working mostly following your lead. What didn't he say that he should have said?
That was a good start. That was a good start. It is a disgrace that in the world's second largest economy that we let our children be the poorest group of citizens. And the younger they are, the poorer they are. And I just want us to kind of get it, that the greatest national, economic, and military security problem we face does not come from any enemy without. It comes from our failure to prepare millions and millions of children for the future, and that we let children be the poorest group, and the younger they are, the poorer they are, and that we have not caught up with most of the industrialized world and having a high-quality early childhood system. We've still got all of these uninsured children, and the fact that a majority of all of our children, all racial and income groups, cannot read or compute at grade level, and 80% of our non-white children cannot read or compute in 4th and 8th grade. That's a disaster, and 80% almost, 72% of our military, 18 to 22-year-olds can't get into the military because of poor health care, literacy levels, prior incarceration. How are we going to prepare our children to compete in a globalizing arena if we don't give them the very basic survival needs? And it's going to be our undoing. And so I just want to say I think this is the issue that we have got to focus on if we're going to be strong in the future.
Randy, you were going to talk more about education in just a bit. That's probably the second big bucket we want to get in. In fact, let me just one of the things we've learned over time is why not tell the audience the work we're trying to do, because then you can actually help us do it. We're going to spend some time on the general question of inequality, spend more time digging into what we can do about it through education, and then we're going to spend some time talking about how to pay for this stuff. Randi, you've had a lot to say, thank goodness, of late about this question of social inequality and the role of public policy and education. Say a little more now about the contours of the problem and what you think we ought to be focused on.
So look, with this panel, the problem is obvious and people have talked about it. I like talking about what to do about it a lot more than what the problem is, although, teachers throughout the country see it, feel it, work, address every single day. And I do think that one of the things we saw in one of the commitments earlier about reading and using First Book as a strategy, and something that Marian Wright Edelman said, and I think all of us feel the same way in terms of she is really our conscience, and I am very grateful for you every single day. That there are certain points we must focus on, like how do we help all kids read at grade level by grade 3? That is a really key point in children's lives. And if we don't actually have early childhood to help do that, early childhood education, then for many kids that's not going to happen. But one more point I want to raise, which is that 22% of the kids in our country are poor. 51% of children who go to public schools are poor. And you see that huge shift now. And then the issue in terms of concentrated poverty is also a very, very, very big issue. So, number one, I would say that we have to focus on 4 different strategies, certainly for all kids, but 4 different strategies for kids in concentrated poverty. Capacity building of our workforce is absolutely essential. If we don't actually have the teachers that kids need, and we don't constantly, in an ongoing way, help prepare those teachers, shame on us. And one of the things we need to do is we need to increase the diversity of our teaching force. Our teaching force is actually getting whiter and whiter, as opposed to being much more diverse and much more reflective of the kids we teach. But I can go on and on in that. Let me do 2, 3, and 4. Number 2, we must address children's well-being. We have to start with where kids are, not where we want them to be. And so there's lots of places in the country, Promise Neighborhoods, other places. We've done community schools where we wrap services around schools, which are absolutely essential as a way of addressing many of the social and the other impacts, the toxic impacts that kids and go through every single day. Number 3, so capacity building, children's well-being. Number 3, engagement. We've just been through this stultifying debate for the last decade about testing versus teaching. It's ridiculous. Testing is about data. It's about informing instruction. It is not instruction. We need to engage kids in a way that they want to go to school. So I don't care if it's art, I don't care if it's music, I don't care if it's physical education. You want a child to wake up in the morning and say, I want to go to school, not I hate school. Because if they don't want to go to school, we're not going to be, and it's not even just chronic absenteeism, it's we want to engage. And so there's lots of different ways to do it. And the last piece I would say is schooling is not a competitive sport. Schooling is about people working together in a collaborative way with outside groups, with not-for-profits, with business, with clergy, to actually make schools the welcoming, safe environment they should be for all children.
We'll come back to these issues of collaboration and engagement in a second, Marian, because I really want you to talk about the freedom schools, among other things. But Michael, you mentioned the promised neighborhoods, and I think you're in the catbird seat in terms of understanding how communities might build supports around young people. Um, we have an example of it right here in Atlanta, but these things are not so easy to scale. Could you talk a bit about how this work is advancing and what we can do to do it in a bigger way?
Sure. So I think the first thing we need to do is to be mindful of where we enter into the evolution of things and always be mindful of the history. So Promised Neighborhoods was 40 years in the making. It stands on the shoulders of a lot of work. And our biggest problem today is often that we enter thinking that we're creating something new and we don't actually understand how to extend the knowledge or the practice. This moment in time, it seems that the innovation for us is to figure out how do we extend the practice of scaling results. We know we can do good programs, we know we can do good initiatives. So for us, what that means for Promised Neighborhoods is that it starts with a clear understanding of what is the population that we're trying to support and partner with to improve outcomes for. That's a simple question, but it's a quite powerful question. Because when you just ask the question about what's your number, what is the population, and you let that drive strategy, you soon realize the things that you want to do often don't get you where you want to go. So for Promised Neighborhoods, the question is, can you start with that question? Then can you have a strong results framework that grounds the work? Promised Neighborhoods, 10 results, 15 indicators at every developmental stage of a child's life. That in and of itself is also an evolution of the field. We know we can do good work at a particular developmental stage, but rarely have we put it all together. And so it's time for us to start holding our babies at every developmental stage instead of focusing on early childhood, forgetting about them in middle school, and then complaining about the poor numbers in high school. So for us, the innovation is holding the interest of the population, having a strong results framework, creating a system of supports at every developmental stage, and actually being able to articulate what that system is. It's not just folks doing good work. It is folks who can conceptualize an ecosystem and actually articulate that this is a pathway out of poverty into the middle class and beyond in this particular place. That's the work of Promised Neighborhoods.
That sounds a little different, than how we have tended to conceive of our systems operating each in their own silos. Patrick, when I spent time at MDRC, we were awash in long data sets showing the returns to working both with children and parents. I think this 2-gen idea has been a really important one at Casey. Could you talk about that continuum in that way?
Sure, and as Michael says, a lot of this is going back into history and relearning lessons that we perhaps have forgotten. The 2-generation approach is really a simple one, and it suggests that for children to be successful, you've got to simultaneously invest in the child, in early childhood education, quality elementary school education, et cetera, and in the parent, investing in that parent's ability to be an effective parent, but also investing in that parent's ability to participate successfully in the workforce. What we've been working on around the country is bundling services together. Right here in Atlanta, in the Pittsburgh neighborhood, there is a Center for Working Families that anybody in the neighborhood can register with. They get case management, counseling, tutoring, support, et cetera, around their workforce needs, or economic needs, crises, et cetera. But once they're registered, their children become eligible to participate in an early childhood center that is actually in the same building and part of a K-5 elementary school, which has been a turnaround school. And we're seeing the results over the last several years. We're seeing the results in terms of the achievement of the children. Just wanted to say a word about this question of scale, because I think that underlies a lot of this conversation. In our view, we have collectively underutilized existing platforms. Head Start agencies are platforms. They're all over the country. Community colleges are platforms. extension programs, our platforms. We've got to think about how do we bring the best that we're learning from individual programs to those platforms in order to scale. So platforms is part of it. We mentioned systems, which is kind of this vague word. I always say to folks, if you've ever been to the DMV and you're standing in line and saying to yourself, I could figure out a better system than that, you know everything you need to know about system reform. Imagine if the DMV was actually where you had to go if somebody said your child should be removed. That's our child welfare system. So system reform in relation to scale, we are already engaged in some cases to their detriment, intervening in many, many, many millions of families' lives. How do we think about those systems as platforms to bring best practice and effective practice forward? And finally, policy. Policy, again, is one of those broad words, but it really dictates where the money goes, how it goes, what the incentives are, et cetera. And we are on the cusp, believe it or not, in my view, of a real bipartisan, cross-ideological consensus on a lot of the core issues that we need to address in policy to address poverty. 4 years ago, 8 years ago, there was no conversation about poverty and inequality in the presidential election. This year, it's all over the conversation.
Randi, you want to pick up on that?
So I think one of the keys that Patrick just said over and over again is that we are focusing on a holistic way on families. That's what community schools are. That's what wraparound services are. That's what this kind of integration with community colleges and workforce development are. But the one thing that we haven't actually put on the table yet, which I think is also important, is there has to be a job strategy and a workforce skills strategy as part of this. Economics are really important. So you're absolutely right in terms of presidential election. We haven't heard, the kind of conversation about minimum wage in a very long time, or raising wages as a very important piece of what we do. But then how do we do that? So for example, and Carmela, I'm going to embarrass you for a second. Head Start right now, one of our teachers in Head Start in New Mexico, after 12 years, makes $16,000 a year. $16,000 a year. What does that say about how important early childhood is? And so it's not just the professional development, it's also how are we intentional about raising wages? So so I just want to reiterate all the things about focusing on families, having community schools, more wraparound services than we've had, I would say, in 10 years, all throughout the country, very important. But if we don't have the investment in terms of lifting wages and engaging and ensuring that these programs really are viable for the future, it's not going to happen.
Have you heard anything new yet, Marian?
No, but I think, and there's a lot of wonderful models going on, and the issue of scaling up and quality and sustainability are obviously there, but our problems go deeper, and I think we need to put them out on the table. I call them, we've got to change fundamentally and have this country confront our founding birth defects, which keep flaring up every 50 years or so. And until we can confront our history of slavery, of Native American genocide, of the exclusion of all women from the electoral process, and maybe we're going to make a big step forward on that one this year, and the exclusion of, they keep flaring up, and they are the hem underneath that keep kind of undermining our ability to do what we know works, and we know a lot about what works. And we need to teach our history correctly, and our children need to know it, and we need to kind of move from there. But we know how to end poverty. But that's about race. The fact that the black child is the poorest child in America after a massive civil rights movement, and it says everything. Non-white children who are our future, we can invest in them or not invest in them at our own peril. Thirdly, we know what to do. It's about political will, it's about moral will, it's about confronting the racism and the classism, the economic inequality, income and wealth inequality that underlines all of this. We have the Urban Institute, we know what to do. And let me say one other thing, good policy should reflect what every good parent would want for their own child. And they don't come in pieces. We would not think of giving our child health care and not want them to have a home to stay in, or to be homeless, or to not be safe and they have to walk down streets where violence is everywhere, or to not get a good education, or to get an early childhood education. So, but we're siloed, and we don't apply what we know as good parents to good policy, but it's not rocket science. It's just making sure that every child's whole needs are met. And secondly, as already been alluded to, every child and every parent wants a continuum of care. You know, we don't want our children to be born without good prenatal care or with birth defects or with other things. But we want to make sure that they get a good early childhood foundation and then go to school. We wouldn't abandon them, and we want them safe after school, and we want them. So it's good parenting should guide what we want for other people's children and what we want for our own. We asked the Urban Institute, and we know a lot about what works, to do a look at 9 policies that we know work. And how much poverty alleviation impact it would have. And they came back and said if we invested in these 9 programs, housing assistance, minimum wage, earned income tax credits and child tax credits and all the things that we all work on every day in silos because our political process is siloed and our financing process is siloed, they said that we could lift 60% of our children out of poverty. And we could lift 72% of black children out of poverty. And we could lift the floor for 97% of all of our children would get more and have a better chance of seeing a future worth having and striving for. And it would cost $77 billion. And everybody says that's a lot of money. But, you know, it costs us $500 billion every year we keep 15.5 million children in poverty. We had a study of that 10 years ago by a Nobel laureate, Bob Solow, who said we can't afford to have children dropping out of school or staying in poverty. So what is it about this country that refuses to do what is right for children, is sensible for children, is crucial for our future, and we won't invest in it? We tell how we can pay for this $77 billion. It is a bargain because the number of school dropouts, the amount of crime, the amount of imprisonment, and here we've got states who would rather spend 2 to 3 times more to lock our children up in prison than to give them preschool. I mean, something's wrong with that picture, and that's what we've got to have a movement to change. And so it's about race and poverty.
You know, that does make you wonder the extent to which this is as much about understanding the problem and evidence about what to do as it is about will, and possibly the need to change the power dynamics in this country so that folks that have the most at stake get a better shot. But let me come back to Michael in Policy Link on the, you know, so here's an organization that if anyone is figuring out how to burst through those silos and try to find innovative approaches to solving these problems. It seems you and your colleagues, Michael, are out front on that. I wonder if you could say a little more, not so much about the promised neighborhood, about the broader sense of what's really possible.
You actually just heard it. And I think the unfortunate thing is that we often say, we could care less about promised neighborhood because it's not the idea. The opportunity is when I can take the report by the Children's Defense Fund and not have to write my own. So I can put the Policy Link label on it and can just get to work. And when I can show up in my leadership and bring a level of intensity and anger and expectation that something different will happen, that's the work. And too many of us who are privileged to sit in the rooms that we get to sit in aren't pushing hard, aren't challenging the relationships. And so the avoidance is talking about programs before we're talking about our will. Not this magical will of the electorate or whatever, our own leadership will. Our will to sit in these rooms and say what has to be said, to hold each other accountable for delivering on what we know what works. I mean, the work has been done. And so now the question is, how do I join in community if I think about Policy Link? Our job is not to go write another report. Our job is to figure out how do we be respectful but disruptive at encouraging and partnering with folks to do the work. That's the innovation. And quite frankly, I don't believe there's much else to write about until we do something different. The innovation is in us figuring out how do we organize ourselves to get to this vision, this consciousness that you heard Ms. Edelman talk about. That's this moment. And that moment is not coming through a program. It's not coming through a new report. It's going to come by those of us who are blessed to be in this room, choosing that we're going to do something more than just be nice and politic, that we actually are going to hold the interests of children and their families who don't have the luxury of sitting in this room.
So let me just take a little bit of a risk here, which is that after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, our union had a very intense conversation with each other. My secretary-treasurer is an African-American lady that started as a paraprofessional and became the secretary-treasurer of one of the largest unions in America. And Loretta looked at me and said, we have to have a different conversation about a race, even in our own union. And we started a racial justice task force where we wanted as many people of privilege on it as people who were not of privilege. And, you know, what the Justice Task Force came up with was what would be obvious to probably everybody on the panel. That's not the point I want to get to. It was not what the solutions were. Obviously, we have to move away from zero tolerance. We have to find alternatives to suspensions. We have to disrupt this school-to-prison pipeline. In this last year, our union has gone through some really uncomfortable conversations where we have focused directly on white privilege. And what Loretta said to me was, look, you can have as many conversations as you want to have with black people in the room, but if we don't actually break down this silo and have that conversation with white people in the room and have a real understanding that white privilege is there and there's an assumption when you walk into a store, you're a white person, nobody's going to assume that you're about to steal something. When you walk into a store and you're a black person, people are going to assume that you're about to steal something. And white people have to have that conversation. And in order to actually start having the will, so we've had, within our own union, these really uncomfortable and powerful conversations about how do we actually turn privilege around and engage and advocate as much on racial issues as we do on economic issues, because racial and economic issues are the same. And if we don't do that, we're not going to change things, because this has to be about other people's children as well as our own.
You know, Patrick, before we came out, you were talking a little bit about, work that Casey's up to on this very front. I wonder if you're willing to say a little bit more about the opportunities for philanthropy to help advance the kind of conversation Randy's speaking.
Sure, and again, there are many, many foundations around the country, I think, who are taking this work up in very serious ways, thanks to lots of new leadership. But in large measure, because of the leadership of folks like Angela Glover Blackwell and Michael McAfee working with us over the last year or two, we've begun to try to move our own organization beyond a kind of rhetorical reflection so what would we do differently, both within our organization, all of our HR policies, purchasing policies, how we use our influence, et cetera, and also in our work in a much deeper kind of a way. And we've, again, with the help of lots of outside folks giving us advice, we've designed a 5-phase intensive experience for every single person in the organization to go through that begins with history, sets things in context, and then moves to, okay, in your particular work, whether you're an accountant, an investment person, a program person doing child welfare, what can you take from the history to help you understand the specific dynamics in your field, which is leading to the combination of disparity and exclusion that we've been talking about here. And in about a month or so, we're going to take everybody in the organization through the next phase of that work. I'll let you know how it goes. Michael will be there to help us, where we're going to have every unit go very, very deep, putting together work plans on how we move forward. And again, it's just an example. There are lots of foundations, other organizations around the country. But I think what we really do have to do is move past the rhetoric. It's a little too easy. We call it taking a holy picture. And to get to the real, so what are you going to do differently as a result of this conversation? And then you come back in a few months, which is the next phase. You come back and you're accountable. You report out, what did you do? And now how do we get better using results and holding ourselves accountable? But again, I think lots of folks are involved in that kind of work. I think it's the nitty-gritty of the difference between, again, staying at the rhetorical level and really making a difference both in your own organization and in the work that you do.
Randy, you want to say anything on the back of?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think what's happened is that when you start doing this work and people really engage in a real way with each other, and it's been within our union. Look, we represent 1.6 million educators and nurses, and we are the intersection with community. But without really engaging in without, as Marian said, without actually understanding and having respect for a history of deprivation and discrimination, you stay at a rhetorical level as opposed to you really live each other's shared life experiences. And it has changed fundamentally the nature of our union. So instead of people, for example, talking about when we see statistics that show that the disproportionate number of black male students that have been suspended from schools, instead of the first conversation being well, this is why, or this is the reason why, or this is the excuse, the conversation becomes, what are we doing about it? And what kind of, not just policy, but what do we need to do about this? And how do we get through the political work, not just the fighting for resources, how do we get through the will to change this? When we see this in terms of the statistic that even in early childhood, there are 5 times more black children that are suspended in early childhood than in later grades. So the question now becomes not just what do we do about it, but where is that will that you so passionately talked about to change it? And that's why this conversation, sorry for my rambling about this, but this conversation about will is so important, because if we don't actually have the will to change, we are not going to change.
I want you to pick up on that point, because you've had to watch this absence of will for years, and yet you're plugging away, and you've decided to create schools to just kind of get it right. Talk about that.
Well, I want to just affirm progress, though. We have not been spinning our wheels for the last 40 years. Disabled children have a right to federal right to education, which they didn't have. We've got millions of children who have health care. There's something called Medicaid expansion for children, and CHIP. Head Start is now 47% eligibles are getting it. They were way down there in the single digits when we started. We have a child care block grant, which we need to build on. There are 40 laws on the books that were not there, and this is hard work. It should not be so hard, and it's incremental, and we don't need summertime advocates. We really need folk who are going to stick. Full-time and weekends.
Yeah.
Whatever. But the fact is, I just want to affirm we can get something done when we can work together. And secondly, we really don't have a children's problem. We have an adult problem. We got to keep the child in the middle of the table, not adult interest. And it can't be about us, because we need to address the needs of the whole child. That said, I think that I have the strangest things happen in my life sometimes. An old clipping, worn-out clipping from an anonymous aide showed up on my desk one day, and I looked at it, and I said, dang. And it said, everything you need to know in life you can learn from Noah's Ark. And the first lesson was, don't miss the boat. And the United States, because we are driven by self-interest, is going to miss the boat to the future in this competitive, globalizing world if a majority of its children of all colors And 80% of its non-white children, who are becoming the majority of our children, cannot read or compute. How are we going to compete with the Chinese and the Singaporeans and all these folk? And so we need to sort of appeal to our self-interest first. We're going to miss the boat to the future if we don't invest in these little children. The second was, we're all in the same boat. And we do not like these black and brown children, but it is in our interest to invest in other people's children. And it's cheaper to keep them in good schools than in bad prisons. And we need to get our priorities straight. The third, which is we're very bad at, is to plan ahead, that it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And I'm sure they thought he was crazy. But, he was out there, trying to prepare or to do for whatever reason. We don't plan ahead very well because the future of America is in these little babies that we're letting be born without prenatal care, adequate nutrition. And we know what works. We know how to do something about that. And so we need to plan ahead. 4, and I think that's my last 2 lessons are really what I think we all have got to begin to internalize, is, don't be afraid of criticism. I mean, if you don't want to be criticized, don't do anything, don't be anything, don't say anything, but you're not going to get anything done that's going to transform this nation unless you are willing to stand up and take your lumps. And my goodness, we've got the best mission in the world. We're standing up for the most voteless, voiceless people, but the people who are going to determine the American future. So don't be so soft and so scared of trying to, have good friends in the Congress. There are no permanent friends, because we're siloed. And we're not going to agree with everybody and everything, but you really have to work it and make sure that you don't lose sight of the child. It's not enough to go have lunch with somebody in the Senate or in the House. You got to come away with your agenda. Don't forget, it's not about you. It's about something that's broader than you, and you've got the most important mission. And the last one I love most, it says, remember that the Ark, the Titanic, now, other way around. Remember that the Ark was built by amateurs and the Titanic by experts. And so many of us are waiting or thinking that somehow, Dr. King's going to come back, or we're going to somehow have these experts come. Dr. King, and tell us what to do and save us from ourselves. Dr. King never started a single movement. He responded and could encapsulate the dreams and the voices and the demands of ordinary people of grace out in the field. It was the Fred Shuttlesworth, it was Joanne Robinson's, all the people you never heard of. But he was able to tell us what we were trying to say and bring us all together. We have got to come together and get out of our silos and get out of our adult self-interest and make our children the prime thing, because my parents and all of the parents of my generation wanted us to have a better life. That's what the Civil Rights Movement was about. They wanted their children to have a better life. And we better want our children to have a better life and to leave them a better country than we found it. So we need to get out here and build a movement and to take some risk. And movements are hard to come by. And it's like seed planting, but I just think that the job before us, anybody who does not vote this year is not for children, for their country. That is the most, and anybody who's out there trying to organize to get everybody to exercise their vote and to talk about children and the poor, something is missing here. So the job is really up to us to organize and to get out there to make sure that we are building the political leaders that we need to build a future that's fit for our children. So that's the movement building.
Well, I'm left wondered if there's anything more to say or talk about, actually. But we do have 10 minutes, and we do have 10 minutes. And Marian, you're talking to a set of folks here who are committed.
I understand. We gotta do more.
They're set to do stuff, right?
Gotta do more.
And we got to do more. You heard it. You heard it. You heard it, right? I see some questions. I'm waiting to be impressed by the questions I see. But let's try to take one of them up. We've been talking mostly about young people, but the logical extensions, Marian, of your argument, if we've got to get kids in the system, we've also got to get them out the other end to participate fully in the economy. So one question that is here is how best to create opportunity for kids who are non-college bound. And I would offer that question to anyone, although I think some kind of post-secondary experience is really important for everyone. So I'd want to make that point. Patrick, you want to jump on that?
So just an observation that the two areas where we're greatly underinvested, given the payoff, is in early childhood and in post-secondary. And it's not, post-secondary doesn't necessarily mean a traditional college degree, but it means post-secondary training and support and skill development so that one can enter the workforce effectively. We have in this country today, between the ages of 16 and 24, we have more than 5 million young people who are neither employed nor in the workforce. Most of them concentrated in our urban areas, but also in many rural areas as well. These are the young folks we're leaving on the sidelines. And that's where we think we need to make investment. One of the most effective investments that we've seen is building industry sector-based pipelines. That is, thinking about healthcare, that's a sector. How do you build a pipeline to prepare young people to take those healthcare jobs, which can lead to a career advancement? Same with things like transportation or logistics or construction, high skill, middle skill. We haven't figured out those pipelines. So the question about how do we best create opportunity is we have to work on the pipeline, both on the demand side, when folks get tax breaks in order to develop communities, in order to build things. We need to demand that they're also going to have jobs available for the folks from that community and from surrounding communities. That's a demand side. But on the supply side, we've got to reach down into the community, work with community groups who can support young people to become successful for those jobs and create that kind of sector-based pipeline. Again, another example, what we know how to do, we've got to scale it up.
So our union has something we call a Pathways program, where we have 5 cities, including Miami-Dade, Peoria, New York City, San Francisco, and Pittsburgh, where we've actually created those kind of pipelines you're talking about, where we've brought in industry, the community colleges, high schools, to create this kind of opportunities and to suggest to young people, post-secondary education is vital, but we need to have multiple pathways. So career tech ed pathways, where kids envision that the job after 4 years or 6 years, and where companies like IBM will offer kids jobs if they go through a 6-year program, are really, really important. And that has created more opportunities for kids. In fact, career tech ed programs have a higher graduation rate from high school now, and more kids going into college than academic high schools in the United States.
All right, I want to make sure I get to come back to a CGI meeting again, so I want to push a little harder on solutions. Appreciate those two. Mary, maybe this is maybe a better place to talk about Freedom Schools.
The first place is we got to get a high-quality early childhood system that is quality child care, that is we just need to, we're the only industrialized country that does not do this, and I'm very pleased that Secretary Clinton has a very strong set of proposals, but we've got to and we need to go through kindergarten. It needs to be before 0, prenatal care, to home visiting, to 0 to 3, to pre-K and to K, so that children are all ready for school. And we need to get out of our silos, early childhood people, and we need to look at the child getting into first grade, ready to learn. It's not about us adults. It's about good policy and wanting for other people's children what you want for your own. Secondly, we need to create a high-quality summer learning program and after-school program, because we know about summer learning loss. And that's where I'm so proud of the young Black, Brown, Native American college students who are stepping up to the plate. We have close to 200 Freedom Schools around the country in 30 states. We've just come back from 15-hour days, and these are young people who are coming out of the communities where children live and who don't have things to do in the summer. They get to be summer meals. And now something is wrong again in this country where we have summer feeding programs, but there's an 80% drop in the children who get them because the local schools or the local communities will not take them to give children who get free lunches and free breakfasts during the winter. Hunger doesn't go away in the summer, but we have 100% federal funding, and we all need to be pushing our localities, our housing authorities, our mayors, our counties, everybody to feed these children in the summer. What are they going to do all summer when they are missing the basic food systems that we have? And it's jobs for cafeteria workers, it's jobs for bus drivers. What is that all about? It's like, what kind of states will turn down Medicaid? What kind of states will turn down, or local communities will turn down food for children who are hungry in the summer? And we need to do something about that. But more importantly, I think that it's trying to stop summer learning loss. And when children are excited about learning and they see people who look like them, who come from their own communities, and I'm trying to keep everybody out of law school, we don't need any more lawyers, we need teachers. Teachers and education are where the future lie, Randi. So, but we have to have a much more diverse teacher pipeline. They are so excited when they see these young people who came from the communities where they are, which learning can be fun, it must be fun, the books must be diverse, and look, as a little girl said once, we don't like to read these books in school but these books look like us and they give us hope. And children need hope and they need to be excited about their learning. And you know, they're gaining, we're closing that summer learning gap. But more importantly, they are also being taught to be strong inside. And we have a song that everybody sings twice a day in the morning. It's called Something Inside So Strong. I don't care how high you build your barriers, I'm going to overcome them. And I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, a couple of years ago with a juvenile court judge, and she gasped when we were in a jamboree with North and South Carolina Freedom Schools. I said, "What's the matter, Your Honor?" And she said, "You see that little girl out there? I had her in my court 2 years ago, and I thought I'd never see her smile again." And she was out there singing Something Inside So Strong. And they need to understand that they're sacred, that they have endless possibility, and they need to see the role models that show them that they can become like that. So Freedom Schools is my favorite thing in the world, and I hope we're going to feed a lot of them into your public school system.
Yeah, amen.
So I will just add that when I hear the word opportunity, I contextualize it and put it in the community standpoint. There's a design problem in a lot of our communities. If you look at the Ferguson report and you see how, at the same time, everything that we're talking about is trying to be designed in, there is a structure that is deliberate in designing it out, and it is results-based, and it is delivering. And so one of the solutions is that as we're doing—
Thank you for that,
Yes,
by the way.
as
Thank
we're
you.
doing this work, for us to look at that Ferguson report and start asking ourselves, how are fines and fees, the over-policing of community, actually voiding out all this good work? Because those are local policies that, through our apathy or whatever, it is decimating communities. So you go to a freedom school, and then you're getting arrested, and then you end up with a tremendous amount of debt. And before you know it, you're in this vicious cycle, and you cannot get out of it. Being poor is expensive. Being poor is designed beautifully in some of these places. And if we're going to be successful on this end, those of us in these positions have to start redesigning these systems like fines and fees that are a tremendous barrier to opportunity.
Right. Patrick?
Kent, sometimes there's something that is so fundamentally both wrong-headed, morally wrong, literally over 100 years of damage being done to people, and also a colossal waste of money that makes problems worse, that becomes a solution we ought to look at, getting rid of it. And from my point of view, that something is our youth prisons, our adult-type institutions where we lock young people away and then convince them that they're simultaneously dangerous and worthless, take away their dignity and their hope, and then put them back out on the street without any support. We have real opportunity, because the numbers have been coming down, to actually make a commitment that we will close every youth prison in America, and that would be a concrete solution that I would suggest to our audience.
Thank you. We have a big report on that very issue. We've got about 30 seconds. I wish we had more time, and but I don't think I'll be able to steal any. Any final thoughts or comments that any of you would like to make?
Demography and geography are not destiny. That is why we have public education in this country. But we need to actually infuse it with the will of people in this room. We know solutions, but we care about kids. We need the political will to help make it happen. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone on the panel, Marian, Michael, Randi, Patrick, for a very stimulating dialogue, and thank you all for participating with us.